At 9,000 meters above the dark, endless stretch of clouds, the aircraft moved with the quiet confidence of routine flight, its engines humming like a steady heartbeat that reassured every soul on board. Passengers dozed against windows, watched movies, or whispered softly to companions, unaware that anything unusual could ever happen at such a calm altitude. A child counted the blinking lights on the wing, an elderly man traced circles on the armrest, and a flight attendant smiled as she poured another cup of coffee. The sky outside was a deep indigo, painted with faint stars, and for a moment the plane felt less like a machine and more like a small floating world suspended peacefully between Earth and space. The first sign of trouble was so subtle that most people missed it, a faint shudder passing through the cabin floor like a distant tremor. Then the humming heartbeat of the engines faltered, coughed, and returned, causing a few passengers to glance up from their screens. Overhead bins rattled softly, and a baby began to fuss, as if sensing the unease before anyone else could name it. In the cockpit, warning indicators flickered amber, then red, drawing the pilot's attention with sudden urgency. The captain adjusted the controls, expecting the systems to stabilize, but the vibration deepened into a silence that felt unnatural, as though the sky itself had swallowed the sound that kept them alive. Without warning, the cabin lights blinked once, twice, and then dimmed to a pale emergency glow that washed every face in ghostly white. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, replaced by a heavy stillness, broken only by the rush of air outside the fuselage. Passengers exchanged confused looks, searching for reassurance that didn't come, while the aircraft continued forward on momentum alone. A flight attendant gripped the back of a seat to steady herself, her professional calm strained by the realization that something had gone terribly wrong. Somewhere near the rear, a tray hit the floor with a sharp crack that echoed far louder than it should in the quiet. In the cockpit, the alarms erupted all at once, a chorus of mechanical warnings that left no room for doubt. Both engines had failed, their power gone as completely as if someone had simply switched them off. The pilots moved with disciplined speed, running emergency procedures from memory while attempting a restart that refused to respond. Outside, the great turbines that had once spun with unstoppable force now sat motionless against the wind, turning the aircraft into a glider at an altitude where gliders were never meant to be. The captain's voice, steady but tight, reported the emergency to control, knowing every second of silence meant precious altitude slipping away. Back in the cabin, panic began to spread like a ripple across water, starting with whispers that grew into questions. Some passengers clutched armrests, others reached for loved ones, while a few stared straight ahead in stunned disbelief. The sensation of descending without engine thrust felt wrong, like an elevator dropping too fast, subtle but terrifying once noticed. Oxygen masks did not deploy, which only deepened the confusion because frightened Q, in absence of visible crisis, made the invisible one harder to comprehend. A young boy asked his mother why the plane had become so quiet, and she forced a smile she didn't feel, pulling him close as if she could shield him from the sky itself. The crew moved through the aisle with determined calm, instructing everyone to fasten seatbelts and remain seated, their voices practiced but edged with urgency. Training told them to project confidence even when fear threatened to break through, and they did so with admirable strength. One attendant paused to help an elderly passenger secure his belt, her hands trembling just enough to betray the strain she carried. The emergency lighting cast long shadows that made the cabin feel narrower, closing in around them as altitude slowly bled away. Every small sound, a cough, a click, a whispered prayer, seemed amplified in the oppressive hush left behind by the silent engines. As the aircraft descended through layers of cloud, the outside world vanished into a swirling gray void that erased any sense of direction. The sensation of gliding became more pronounced, a smooth but unstoppable slide through the air that offered no hint of rescue. In the cockpit, repeated attempts to restart the engines failed, leaving the pilots to calculate how far they could travel before gravity claimed the rest. Air traffic control searched desperately for the nearest runway within reach, their voices crackling with urgency over the radii. Each calculation carried the weight of hundreds of lives balanced on numbers that shrank with every passing second. Amid the tension, a strange calm began to emerge from an unexpected place, cutting through the fear like a single clear note in chaos. From somewhere in the cabin, a young voice spoke quietly but firmly into a handheld emergency transmitter that had been left unsecured. The words were not cries for help or confused questions, but a precise sequence that sounded practiced, almost professional. Those closest turned in surprise, unsure whether they had heard correctly, while a flight attendant froze mid-step. The child's expression held none of the panic surrounding them, only focused determination that seemed far older than their years. Over the emergency frequency, the calm voice repeated a call sign that had not been spoken in a very long time, its syllables carrying a weight no ordinary passenger could have understood. In distant control room, missions and military monitoring stations, operators stiffened as recognition dawned, hands flying across consoles to verify what their ears insisted was real. Radar systems shifted attention toward the powerless aircraft, tagging it with new urgency as protocols changed in an instant. The sky around the struggling plane, once empty and indifferent, suddenly became a place of silent coordination as unseen forces prepared to respond. On board, no one yet realized that the quiet child had just altered their fate. The first sign that something extraordinary was happening came as a distant thunder rolling across the sky, a deep vibration that passengers felt before they heard it. Heads turned toward the windows as two sleek shadows sliced through the clouds with impossible speed, their silhouettes sharp against the pale light outside. Within seconds, the shapes resolved into fighter jets, their angular wings steady as they matched the crippled aircraft's descent. Gasps spread through the cabin as people realized they were no longer alone in the sky. The presence of the escorts brought a fragile thread of hope, as if hell had finally found them in the vast emptiness. The fighters moved with precise discipline, one sliding into position near the left wing, while the other held slightly above and to the right, creating a protective formation. Sunlight glinted off their canopies, flashing like signals meant only for the pilots inside the powerless plane. In the cockpit, the crew stared in disbelief for a fraction of a second before training took over, acknowledging the escorts with steady professionalism. The captain felt a surge of relief he dared not fully express, knowing these jets represented coordination far beyond ordinary emergency response. Someone somewhere had understood the call sign and acted without hesitation. Inside one of the fighters, the pilot listened carefully to the emergency channel, his gloved hand steady on the controls as he studied the damaged aircraft. When the calm young voice repeated the call sign, recognition struck like a physical force, stirring memories of briefings and stories whispered with respect. That name belonged to a legend long retired, a figure whose missions had once shaped the course of conflicts few civilians even knew about. The pilot exchanged a glance with his wingman through a silent coded signal, both understanding the impossible truth. Whatever was happening on board, that plane was far beyond a routine rescue. Back in the cabin, passengers pressed close to the windows, despite instructions to remain seated, drawn by the surreal sight of the fighters pacing them through the clouds. Fear slowly gave way to awe, whispers replacing panicked voices as people realized survival might actually be within reach. A child pointed excitedly, momentarily forgetting the danger, while others wiped tears of relief from their eyes. The aircraft still descended in heavy silence, but the presence of the escorts made the fall feel guided rather than hopeless. Even the Attendants allowed themselves brief glances outside, their composure strengthened by the unmistakable symbol of protection. Guidance began immediately, the fighter pilots relaying precise instructions to the cockpit about heading, altitude, and the nearest runway capable of receiving a powerless aircraft. Every adjustment had to be perfect, because there would be no second attempt if they misjudged the glide. The captain followed each direction with absolute focus, trusting the calm authority in the voices guiding them through the invisible corridors of air. Instruments were monitored with relentless attention, calculations updated by the second as terrain and distance shifted. The powerless plane became part of a coordinated dance, its path shaped by the swift guardians at its sides. As they broke through the lower cloud layer, the ground finally appeared, a patchwork of fields and distant lights that seemed both welcoming and terrifyingly far away. The runway, identified by the escort's stretch, ed like a narrow promise on the horizon, reachable only if everything continued to go exactly right. Passengers fell silent again, sensing the final and most dangerous phase had begun. The aircraft trembled slightly as the pilots adjusted its descent angle, squeezing every possible meter from the remaining altitude. Outside, the fighters peeled back just enough to give space, while still maintaining watchful positions, ready to respond to any sudden change. The landing approach felt endless, time stretching thin as the runway grew slowly larger through the windshield. Without engine thrust, there would be no chance to circle or try again, only one precise glide that had to end perfectly on the ground. The captain's hands remained steady despite the pressure, guided by training and the knowledge that hundreds of lives depended on his calm. In the cabin, people clasped hands, bowed heads, or stared forward in frozen concentration, united by silent hope. The wheels lowered with a heavy thud that echoed like a declaration of commitment to the attempt. When the aircraft finally touched the runway, the impact was hard and to jolt every passenger forward against their belts, followed by a roar of friction as rubber met asphalt. For a terrifying moment, it seemed as though the plane might veer off course, but the pilots fought the controls with unwavering determination. The aircraft shuddered, slowed, and then continued straight, its speed bleeding away until it rolled at last into a manageable PI. Ace. Applause erupted spontaneously, mixed with sobs and laughter that released the fear held in check for so long. Survival no longer felt theoretical, but solid beneath their feet. Emergency vehicles raced alongside as the plane came to a complete stop, their flashing lights reflecting across the fuselage like a celebration in Motio. Edlin. Crew members allowed themselves exhausted smiles, some wiping away tears they had held back until the danger passed. Passengers stood despite instructions, embracing strangers as if they had known each other for years, bound together by the shared miracle. Outside, the fighter jets circled once overhead before disappearing into the distance, their mission complete without ceremony. The sky that had nearly become a grave had instead delivered them safely back to Earth. Amid the emotional chaos, the child who had spoken the legendary call sign quietly slipped back into their seat, unnoticed by most of the celebrating passengers. Their expression was calm, almost distant, as if the ordeal had awakened memories rather than fear. A flight attendant paused nearby, studying the child with a mixture of curiosity and gratitude, sensing there was a story hidden behind those steady eyes. But no explanation came, only a small, polite smile that revealed nothing of the past that had just saved them all. Outside, the world carried on as usual, unaware that a forgotten legend had briefly returned through the voice of a child.